This week we jump into chapter 45 of Genesis, and this is one that has taken me a while to record a video for because God has made me read it over and over and over again. And so I love chapter 45 because this is where Joseph finally reveals himself to his brothers. The very first verse says, "Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him. He called out, 'Cause every man to go out from me.' So no one stood there with Joseph while he made himself known to his brothers." Now this is the most important part. Verse 2 says, "He wept and sobbed aloud, and the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard about it." There was so much pent up hurt, sadness, grief, all of the things that Joseph wailed, right? He wept aloud for this recovery of this relationship with his brothers. And I love that he goes on. I mean, as you can imagine, his brothers had to be in utter shock. The things that they had done to him, what they had put him through. I'd be scared. I would not want to be in that room when my brother would reveal himself after the terrible things I had done. And so you can see that they're in shock, but I love what he says in verse 5, "Don't be distressed." And you'll see this throughout several chapters moving forward. He says this over and over to them. "Do not be distressed and disheartened or vexed and angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." It says, "For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 more in which are to be there will neither be plowing nor harvest. But God sent me before you to preserve you for a posterity and to continue a remnant on the earth, to save your lives by a great escape and save you many survivors. So now," best line, "it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, the Lord of his house, and the ruler over all of Egypt." And I think this is the most important thing of this whole story is sometimes things happen to us, some things happen because of us, and we go through life with this vision of, they did this to me or someone did that to me or what have you. And here he is clear to say, God had a plan from the beginning. Yeah, you guys did these terrible things. Your sin was revealed through it, right? But God had a plan and he works it all through every situation. And so I love this part of the story because it's just the redemptive plan of God. Throughout the word, as you study the Bible, you'll find out that God's always about redeeming us, redeeming the situations, redeeming our hurt, redeeming our pain, right? We might have gone through some terrible things, but God wanted us to grow and was able to use our pain. I don't think that God inflicts pain, but he does not waste our pain. And so we see that he is brought before here. Even in verse 15, it says, "Moreover, he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them." It says all of his brothers. So, when the part that struck me before was when they threw him in the pit, they ate lunch right next to the pit, right? They had to have heard Joseph screaming. He had to have been begging them to do something different. He heard the words they spoke. He knew exactly which brother did what. And it says that he still hugged and kissed and wept on all of them. And that just shows the forgiveness that's possible when we put our trust in God. That kind of forgiveness is not possible with human nature. But with God, we can have that kind of forgiveness. And I think that's so beautiful of what God's redeeming grace can do. And then the last part of this chapter that I want to point out before we end today is in verse 28. It says, and they're telling Israel, his father, that he's alive. And I love in verse 28, it says, "And Israel said, 'It's enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die.'" And it says that he was, right before that, it says, and life returned to him. He was revived. You can imagine a father that has lost a son, a beloved son, had been, in the dumps. He was older. He, just had all these feelings. And to find out your son that you thought was dead for all these years is alive. What a wonderful redeeming thing for Israel in a way of renewing that faith that God is faithful. And so if there's anything we can learn this week in this chapter is that God is faithful and he works through situations. Joseph, we don't see that he ever begged to get out of this situation. Instead, we just see he thrived where he was. And that's because his faith in God. And so today I encourage you, put your faith in God. Don't worry about the situations you're in. Trust him. Do what the Holy Spirit tells you to do. And God will work it out so that you can stand before someone or some situation one day and say, God was in the middle of it, just like Joseph. Next week, we'll check into chapter 46.